Hello, everybody. My name is Nick Krasny, and I'm a product manager at Google. I'll be moderating today's Talk at Google with our very special guest, Eric Barker. Eric's first bestseller, Barking Up the Wrong Tree, the surprising science behind why everything you know about success is mostly wrong, is about the extraordinary science behind what actually determines success and, most importantly, how anyone can achieve it. His latest bestseller, and the subject of today's talk, is Plays Well with Others, the surprising science behind why everything you know about relationships is mostly wrong. The book is a smart, surprising, and thoroughly entertaining guide to help build better relationships, reignite love, and get closer to others, whether you're an extrovert or introvert, socially adept or socially anxious. Naturally, Eric, you cover all the bases. You talk about psychics, serial killers, lepers, people with perfect memory, and of course, a German horse that can do math. And today, I wanted to talk with Eric about what we can learn from friendships, especially friendships at work, as well as loneliness. Obviously, as Googlers, we care a lot about this because we spend a lot of time at work, and we'll save some time at the end to answer questions from the audience. So, Eric, to start, what is friendship?
It was an interesting question because there was the technical definition that you see in the research, but it didn't really get to a lot of the aspects of altruism and stuff that I was interested in. So I started digging and I found that 2,000 years ago, Aristotle said that a friend is another self, which, sounds great. It's kind of like a Pinterest quote, but I was like, this isn't research backed. And then I looked, and actually more than 65 studies support Aristotle's idea from 2,000 years ago that a friend is another self. Basically, when we get close with someone, our vision of ourselves and our vision of the other person actually overlap like a Venn diagram. And if you put women in an fMRI machine and you say their best friend's name, the areas for self-processing light up in the brain. If I ask you, about a particular trait, and I say, is this true of you or is this true of your close friend? It'll actually take you longer to respond for a close friend than for an acquaintance because your brain needs to disentangle, is this me or is this them? Because again, this idea of ourself overlapping with them. So a really quick and actually scientifically true way to define friendship is a friend is another self.
Wow. Remarkable. Well, it sounds like friendship must be really important then. Is it?
Friendship is super important. Robin Dunbar at Oxford looked at basically 1 year after a heart attack, what determines whether people are alive or not. And what he found is it really came down to two things. Number one, do you smoke? And number two, how many friends do you have? Now, granted, like nutrition, exercise, all this other stuff matters. But those two were so much more important than any of the rest. Do you smoke? How many friends you have? Friendships are critical for health. And research by Daniel Kahneman shows that friendships make us happier than any other relationship. Sorry, spouses. But basically, friendship doesn't have an institution behind it. Marriage is a contract, and your boss, there's a contract. It's like friendship without an institution behind it. You don't have to like your spouse. You don't have to like your employer. If you don't like your friends, you won't hang out with them. So friendship's fragility actually proves its purity. So friends make us happier than any other relationship because if they didn't make us happy, we wouldn't be a part of them anymore.
Yeah, it sounds like by continuing to stay friends with someone, you're kind of voting for the friendship, renewing it, and being in close touch there. Wow. But that's actually really interesting when you think about certain context-specific friendships. And now I'm thinking about friendships at work. So many of us work, we show up, you get paid, you use that money to buy food and shelter and all of that. And then I guess in doing so, you may make some friends. Are those friendships important, the friendships you make at work?
Super important. Only 20% of people say that they consider their manager a close friend, but those people are 2.5 times more likely to be happy with their jobs.
Wow.
And if you have 3 close friends at work, those people report being 96% happier with their life. Now, that's not 96% happier with their job, 96% happier with their life. We spend so much time at work and around coworkers that provides a critical part of that friend support. So friends at work are critical.
Wow. It sounds like if you're looking for a team or looking for a job, maybe you should be asking, can I become friends with these people or have very close friends with them just to improve the quality of your own life?
I mean, Robert Sutton at Stanford has basically often said that when you're interviewing for a job, it's like make sure that you like and feel connected, feel similar to the people at the job, because you're going to become like them. They're not going to become like you. So if these are people who you feel like you feel connected to, you feel similar to, or that you aspire to be similar to, that's great. But if you don't feel connected to them, if you don't think this is a healthy environment, you don't want to do that, because like I said, it's going to pull you more towards the way they are than the opposite.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So I think we've established now that a friend is like another self, that the context that you put yourself in start to turn you into the people around them, that friendships are incredibly important. And partly by virtue of how much time we spend at work, friendships at work are especially important.
Absolutely.
So I guess the natural next question then becomes, how do we make friends? Asking out of personal interest and apparently professional interest as well.
Well, that's interesting. When I went down the rabbit hole for the research on this one, the first thing I naturally looked at was Dale Carnegie. He wrote the book that How to Win Friends and Influence People, has been around forever. Everybody knows it. And the funny thing is, that book was written long before the advent of social science. Yet, researchers have tested everything he said, and the majority of what Carnegie wrote is accurate. It really is helpful. Finding similarity. It's like expressing sincere compliments. The only thing is that Carnegie wrote that book largely for business contacts and business relationships. So it's good for the early parts of a relationship, for making an acquaintance, but we actually need to go past that if we want to deepen and build like long-term, strong friendships.
That's interesting. I think Dale Carnegie's advice was like smile, use somebody's first name, kind of. I remember you can look at the table of contents, right?
Yeah.
It captures the lessons, but it sounds like just doing that might be the sort of opening gambit in the chess game that is friendship, I guess. But it's not going to actually develop a deep friendship. It might develop an acquaintanceship.
Yeah, I mean, it's largely a book for business relationships, but also there's kind of a manipulative aspect to Carnegie's book, and it's great for developing early friendships, but it's also kind of a good playbook for con men, because like we like those tips because they're easy, but anybody trying to manipulate somebody would like those tips as well because they're easy. And that's really the critical key in terms of developing deeper friendships. Is we need to use an economics term, we need to show costly signals. We need to show things that are a little bit more difficult, a little bit more, quote unquote, expensive, to show that we're serious. And that comes down to what I found is time and vulnerability. Time is critical because it's naturally scarce. If I spend an hour with you every day, I can only do that for 24 people, the end, no discussion. And vulnerability, talking about things that might be embarrassing, talking about weaknesses. You're giving the other person information that could be used against you. That demonstrates that you trust this person rather than merely saying it in a very thin, shallow way. You're actually saying, here's something that could hurt me. That demonstrates trust. And in most cases, people reciprocate that trust.
So it sounds like what you're suggesting is maybe there's a quality time thing, but actually there's no substitute for quantity time if you're making friends.
I mean, it's a powerful time is a powerful signal in like ongoing, and most of the research shows that time is what it takes to build friends. Jeff Hall did research, and he quantified it basically takes roughly 60 hours to develop a light friendship and 200 or more hours to develop the best friend achievement. But what's interesting is we can kind of shortcut that. Arthur Aaron did research on vulnerability, opening up, talking about deeper issues. And within an hour, he was able to make people feel like lifelong friends. In fact, it was so effective that two of his research assistants ended up getting married. So vulnerability is super critical. Just getting to know somebody, those deeper things, not just facts, but also feelings, how they feel, what's going on in their mind, what are their concerns. That's what takes things, because we've all been in that situation where we're talking to somebody and we kind of hit a wall and it just goes in circles. It doesn't get deeper. And that's the critical key, is kind of like opening up. Frankly, as I talk in the book about, I call it the scary rule, which is, if it's scary, say it. You don't want to immediately admit to any murders, but you want to, like, slowly and incrementally, be a little bit more open, be a little bit more deep, reveal your feelings. This is how we get from those kind of acquaintances into deeper friendships.
Just to put the time thing in context, before we talk about dig into vulnerability a little bit, 60 hours, you said, for a light friendship. Yep. That is a full work week and a half, it sounds like, to actually make a friend for a 40-hour work week.
It's crazy to think about that, but I think with a lot of relationships, we don't usually think about, like, if you work with somebody, you see them an hour a day, it's like, okay, that's what, probably, 5 work days, probably gonna be like 3 months. If enough vulnerability is there, your neighbors, you're going to see them consistently over time. But yeah, it's like, that's why it's difficult, especially as an adult. When you think about it, so many friendships are made. It seems so easy when you're young and gets harder when you're older. But that's because, being at school, hanging out with friends, you have the time to do it. And, we really need to be kind of deliberate about making that time as we get older. But what's powerful is that when we are deliberate about it, we can develop those deep friendships we need.
Yeah. I recall from the book, you speak a little bit about rituals for the purposes of doing that.
Yeah, that's something that's kind of a great cheat, a great shortcut. It's like, if you consistently have a time, if you work out together, if you go shopping together, if you have an activity that is consistent and on the calendar, now all of a sudden it doesn't become like, another meeting, in your work life. It becomes a habit. And once something becomes a habit, it's so much easier. It's so much more consistent. We don't have that mental overhead of having to, like, turn it into an Xbox achievement where we have to get to those hours. It becomes a lot easier if we have rituals in place.
Yeah, 200 hours of friendship played, now on the best friend leaderboard.
Exactly.
After I think 5 full work weeks for the best friend achievement. Remarkable. So to recap, then, it sounds like quantity time, and then vulnerability, with a strategy of progressively revealing a little bit more and more, saying a little bit of a scarier and scarier thing to your friend, really can shortcut those. But at the end of the day, it's these costly, incredible signals of friendship that allow people to really achieve that other self status.
I mean, absolutely. You can look at it from the other side as well, which is that a lot of people will say, I don't feel supported enough by my friends. And if you're not being vulnerable, if you're not talking about the things that scare you or concern you, how can people help you if they don't know what you're dealing with? So that issue of vulnerability, it's a signal that tells somebody you care and you're trying, but also it is the information. And that allows somebody to say, hey, Nick's having trouble with something, let me help him out. That's what kind of, like, can start the friendship flywheel going.
I like that. The friendship flywheel. That's I like that a lot.
I should have put that in the book. Jeez.
Yeah, actually. Next title. Now follow-up book would be the friendship.
Maybe for the paperback edition.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So, it's interesting, going back to this idea of achieving another self status, I guess, and doing so through time and vulnerability. You would sort of expect that getting to know somebody and becoming a deeper level of friend and becoming more similar would allow us to become maybe better judges of what's this person thinking, what's this person doing, what's their character like. But actually, your book sheds a little bit of doubt onto that. Maybe you can say a little bit more.
Yeah, it's really interesting. In terms of sizing somebody up with first impressions, we're actually surprisingly good at that. Roughly 70% of the time when we meet someone for the first time, we can size them up on, like, fundamental personality traits, again, so like the 70% accuracy level. But in the moment when we're talking to someone and we're curious about what's on their mind, we're horrible at this. Like we're terrible at this. And ironically, we're way overconfident.
Hmm.
Nicholas Epley's research shows that, with strangers, we can only accurately predict what's on their mind 20% of the time. With friends, we hit 30%. And with spouses, we top out at 35%. So whatever you think is on your spouse's mind during a conversation, 2/3 of the time you're wrong. We're not good at this. And with more time, we actually don't get more accurate. We get more confident, but we don't get more accurate.
Oh, wow. So what you're saying is, you have a friendship or a spousal relationship. Yeah, you get better at making these predictions, but you get way more confident in your ability to make those predictions at a rate that outstrips your actual incremental ability.
Yeah, we like egocentric anchoring, is a term that's used. And basically that means we think that people think like we do.
Huh.
And, it's like you think about the little kid that gets their parent a gift that they would actually like
Yeah.
an action figure or something. We tend to do that ourselves. And no, people have very different perspectives. Our ability to read people is very limited. The secret to reading people better isn't really to improve your reading skills. It's to make the other person more readable. So in other words, our sensors are not that great, but if we can get the other person to send a stronger signal, then we will become more accurate.
That's interesting because I know, we've spent, not we, Google, we society have spent a lot of money on profiling. There's some TV shows about this, kind of police procedurals. Has anybody gotten systematically good at this?
Not really.
Okay.
Police profiling, serial killer profiling, is basically pseudoscience. It's when researchers have done a lot of tests on this, and basically it's like cold reading. It's like what astrologers and tarot card readers do. The issue becomes base rates. Basically, you're saying a lot of vague general statements that could be true of anybody. And due to confirmation bias, we tend to lock on to the things that are accurate and ignore the things that aren't accurate. So our ability to read people in that way is usually not very good. In order to get better at it, first off, we need to be motivated. We need to be curious. What you see in the research is that people are actually better people readers on first dates. Because on a first date, there's stakes. All of a sudden, there's something to be won, there's something to be lost, and our brains usually just idle along. Our brains are very energy efficient, which is sort of a euphemism for lazy. And so we need to sharpen that. And all of a sudden, it's like bringing your A game, when you're competing. All of a sudden, when there's stakes, when there's something to be won or lost, we focus, and that really helps. But again, we sort of hit that ceiling. The critical point becomes, making the other person more readable.
So just to re-anchor us here a little bit, we have the egocentric anchor, which I think is the thing that slows down the friendship flywheel. We have the egocentric anchor, which is, people like me must think like me. That turns out to not be the case so much. Getting better at reading people isn't so effective, or at least we don't know how to make it so effective. We can do our best, though, to make people more readable. And it sounds like the way to make people more readable is to really be motivated and curious to learn more about them.
Well, the motivation issue is on our end. The motivation and curiosity issue does bring our best reading skills to the forefront. Making the other person more readable is often more about leveraging the environment. So, for instance, if you meet somebody, for coffee, the environment's not going to be sending you a lot of strong signals. Versus if you play basketball with someone, I'm going to see you participating. I'm going to see, are you cooperative? Do you cheat? How do you interact with others? When you're losing, do you get angry and frustrated, or do you laugh it off? So now I'm getting a lot more information because I'm not just relying on what you're saying. You could be lying. I'm seeing how you behave in the moment, and that's going to give me a more accurate signal. The other issue as well is bringing other people into the mix. if I only meet somebody in the presence of their boss, do you think I'm going to see the full them? It's like they're probably going to be more polite, more diplomatic. So other people can bring out different facets of someone you're trying to learn more about. So, like I said, by doing something that we get to see someone's reactions and behaviors, that's going to send a stronger signal. And by bringing other people into the mix, we'll see different facets of someone.
Wow. So it sounds like first impressions are pretty good. It sounds like costly and credible signals, again, can be drawn out of maybe the environment and other people. And, I think, like you said, in a setting where you see someone interacting with you because they're playing basketball or something, you'll get a much richer signal than maybe just sitting down and having coffee on those dimensions. On the other hand, adding other people might also modulate that signal a little bit because that person might be your boss or your spouse or something else that might cause some slightly different behavior.
Michael Lewis, the author, told a story about when he was first out of college. He was interviewing for a job, and he showed up at the job interview, and the guy said, "Oh, hey, before we sit down for the interview, I got to move some of this furniture. Would you mind helping me?" And he got the job, but what he came to realize was every person who showed up to interview, he always had them help move furniture every single time. And this guy was probably unknowingly. He probably didn't see the research, but he got the gist of it, which is that interacting with someone, hey, how do we coordinate? How does this person communicate? Do they get angry if the couch won't fit through the door? He was actually getting a much more honest signal from people through this little test of sorts than merely sitting down and asking the usual interview questions.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Before we, I guess, move on, would love to just spend a moment to understand a little bit more about what you were talking about with base rates, including psychics, astrologers, tarot readers, and all of that. I think I accept it as uncontroversial that if you pick up a horoscope and pick a random one, it'll probably sound right, regardless of at least my astrological sign. Maybe you can share a little bit more about what that means for people reading and maybe how that works.
Well, I mean, this comes down to what's called cold reading, which is what magicians, astrologers, tarot card readers do, either deliberately or not deliberately. Which is, if I say, you're someone who enjoys being around people who are close to you, that most people are going to agree with that. Yeah, it's like, but it's not very insightful. That's true of most people. So making more general statements like that, or, if I know someone's dressed formally, maybe they have a professional job, I can start to say things that are, again, very generally true, but that's not a deep level of insight. This is useful. Cold reading is, makes the other person feel like you know them well, but it doesn't have predictive validity. You're not going to be able to necessarily determine, what they're going to do tomorrow or how they'll behave in a specific situation. So that's what we have to disentangle. Is what makes somebody feel like you know them is very different from having hard information, about like what actually is going to determine their behavior going forward. So, that's why astrology, stuff like that, makes people feel good, makes people feel connected, makes people feel safe. And that feeling of control is really valuable, to people. The world can be uncertain, but it's not terribly good in terms of predicting, like, what is this serial killer really like, and what are they going to do next month?
Yeah. So I think we've been talking a little bit now about how well you can read people, how you can make people more readable, how you can use that to deepen friendships. And I guess I naturally thought, are we really bad at giving out signals about our internal state, or are we really bad at just picking them up? And in your book, you had a really remarkable story about a horse that could do math. I wondered if you might share a little bit about that story and maybe what it can teach us about reading other people.
Yeah, this was the story of Clever Hans. Was a horse, basically in the late 1800s that people thought could do math. Some people even thought the horse might be psychic, basically because William von Osten, the guy who owned the horse, could ask it incredible questions, like how many people are in the audience, and the horse could stomp, the proper number of times. How many people in the audience are wearing glasses, and the horse would stomp the proper number of times. I mean, it was incredible. And then by using number of stomps, so like, one stomp equals A, two stomps equals B, the horse could actually answer questions. And it was mind blowing. Like I said, some people thought the horse was as intelligent as a teenager. But what it turned out was that when somebody a lot more rigorous with their scientific method came along, they were able to figure out that the horse wasn't that smart, couldn't figure out, didn't know the answers to these questions. What the horse was great was at reading people, because when the horse gave good answers, it got a carrot or a tasty lump of sugar, and the horse could read the person. And when the person knew, oh, 5 stomps is the correct answer, when Hans would do the 5th stomp, Hans could tell on the person's face, oh, I need to stop now, I got the right answer. But when Hans could not see the person who was answering the question, Hans, all of a sudden, his answers became no better than chance. So it's that issue of, that readability, being able to like read people is so powerful, even in horses. And the clever Hans story actually led to the double-blind placebo method that is now used in scientific research.
Oh, that's remarkable, because you don't want the researcher to know and implicitly give away what they want the result to be, just like you don't want the subject or the patient to know that either.
Exactly. If I'm doing a study on a medication, and half the people are getting the real medication, half people are getting a placebo, and every time I administer the placebo, I like roll my eyes and snicker, that's gonna contaminate the study results. But if I don't know what I'm administering, whether it's the medication or the placebo, then I can't contaminate the study.
Actually, speaking of placebos, you write about that a little bit in your book, and speak to, I think, the value of, do you want to share a little bit about what placebos and friendship have in common?
Yeah, it's really incredible. The research on placebos is fantastic. Probably the biggest insight being that, open label placebos even have an effect. What that means is placebos even work when we know they're placebos. Wow. And it's really crazy. But what it comes down to is the idea of we see pain, as coming directly from injury. And really pain is a very complex system in the brain. And it's more like a warning light on the dashboard of your car, like, check the oil. And when we're concerned, when we're worried, when we have a physical problem, your brain is like, you need to address this. That's where the pain comes from. But when we feel like we're taken care of, we're safe, other people are going to help us, the pain signal gets dialed down, because again, it's like, oh, I don't need to shout at you anymore. You're addressing this. So what we see is that, when doctors spend more time with patients, pain goes down. When people feel like they're being treated with the best methods, they're, concern, care, all of these things actually reduce pain, and real medications work better with the placebo method. When we feel like it's legitimate, we feel people are looking out for us, we're concerned. So, basically, if you reduce it, friendship can decrease pain. When we feel like other people are looking out for us, we feel much better. And this ties into all the research on loneliness.
So just to recap where we've been, I think we've now seen that friendships are like being another self. Friendships are incredibly important. Friendships, especially friendships at work, predict all sorts of important things about our lives, including overall well-being. Time spent with people is perhaps the best way to send out the costly, incredible signals of friendship. Vulnerability kind of supercharges that. And essentially, in order to get to that level of vulnerability, we can try to make people more readable in order to better understand their state. And I think, one of the things during COVID, when you wrote this book, a lot of us were really separated from friends and loved ones. And so I think in between now and when we start taking questions from the audience, I'd love to speak about the opposite. Maybe you can tell me about loneliness.
Yeah, loneliness is really fascinating because we kind of get it so wrong. Um, it was really interesting to me because probably the most shocking stuff I came across in the book was related to loneliness. First of all, yes, loneliness is terrible. It's basically correlated with like every negative health metric you can imagine. And imagine me, writing this book in pandemic lockdown, not seeing my friends that often, and here I am hearing about how awful loneliness is. That was not a fun place to be. Loneliness, the stress hormone increase caused by loneliness is the equivalent of a physical assault. So basically, loneliness mentally is like getting beat up. But how we define loneliness is the really surprising part. Faye Alberti, who teaches at the University of York, looked at texts going way back, and what she found was before the 19th century, loneliness basically didn't exist. That's an exaggeration, but not by much. Basically, because if you look at how the word lonely was used, it meant by itself, but it didn't have that negative stigma that we associate with it now. And that's because before the 19th century, we were all embedded in, tribes, religions, nations, villages, groups. We were always connected to other people because, being isolated was death. It wasn't an option. So it was really interesting to see that loneliness as we know it is really a new phenomenon and a new experience. The other thing that really blew me away was John Cacioppo, who did a lot of the key research on loneliness. He found that lonely people don't spend any less time with people than non-lonely people do, which is shocking. But the issue being, when you think about it, it does make sense. We've all felt lonely in a crowd. Just because you're on the subway surrounded by people doesn't stop you from feeling lonely. The issue being that loneliness isn't merely being physically proximate to other people. Loneliness is how you feel about your relationships. So if you are surrounded by people, you're in Times Square on New Year's Eve, you'd be surrounded by people, but you don't feel connected to them. You can feel lonely. On the other hand, if you have great friends, great family, and you're away on a business trip, you don't necessarily feel lonely. You know that those connections are there. When we have strong relationships, but we're away from those people, that's me time. That's solitude. And Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General of the United States, has said solitude is protective against loneliness. We need some me time as long as we feel like we do have those strong connections are still there.
So loneliness, by your description and some of the work that you found, it's really a modern invention. It's really something that is sort of an artifact of modern living. You have your studio apartment. You can order all of your items from the internet. You can get food delivered. You can call people if you want, but really you don't have to be bothered ever for anything if your work doesn't call for it, for example.
Yeah, it is a very new phenomenon. People are living alone more often than others. But again, by itself, that doesn't have to create loneliness. But we don't have those connections, the institutions, religions, groups. We're not as much of a community, as we were before. And that really takes its toll on us because it's just, in some ways where people will talk nutrition wise, they'll say about how we were never meant to eat this much sugar, or we were never meant to eat, trans fats. In that same way, we are a tribal species. We were never meant to be, alone and to not have those connections, or to at least not know that those connections are there. And so it's a very strange negative stimulus when we don't feel that we're a part of something.
And being a part of something, you mentioned religion, kind of people coming to the town square. It sounds like it's not even a function of living densely, because certainly, especially in large cities, people live more densely than they did before. It has to do with actual people getting together, having relationships, depending upon each other, showing care for each other. And then actually, in that sense, it sounds like really developing a sense of tribe.
Yeah, and that's what's fascinating that you see come up is that those issues of loneliness, mental health issues, they are far more pronounced in the developed world, and in big cities, and all the insights around here are really kind of mind blowing. Like when you see, that soldiers, who like come home, they sometimes miss the war. Not that they want to be in physical danger, but those close bonds of relying on others and others relying on them, having that mission, that sense of purpose, that community. There's nothing quite like that when lives are on the line and people depend on you and you depend on them. By the same token, the Amish have what's called rumspringa, which is when young people are allowed to kind of go out into the modern world and live that life for a while. And the funny thing is that the majority of them choose to come back and be Amish. And not only that, since the 1950s to now, the rate of young Amish who come back is only increasing. They are choosing to be in a, fewer options, fewer possibilities, fewer iPhones, but they get that strong sense of feeling, community, people relying on people relying on you. When we have that option, we often choose it when we really feel it, but it's not as prevalent or as visible in the developed world today as it was.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. What are some other ways that people who are, what are some other ways maybe that people create that sense of tribe today using technology? Because one could make the argument that it's never been easier, right? Your space of possible tribe isn't even any longer constrained to the people around you, right? You can have part of your tribe can extend around the world. You may never meet all the people in your tribe with modern collaboration technologies, the internet, social media. What are some ways that people are filling this in?
What's really interesting is a study that came out while I was writing the book in 2020. Showed a really simple way that we can improve this. And what they found was that if you have 5 friends, and they're all good friends, but it's all one off. This person, this person, this person. People feel more supported. People feel happier just by introducing those friends to one another. Because it's very different to have 5 individual friends versus 5 friends who all know each other. Now, to use an overused word, synergy. Basically, you just turned one-off friendships into a community. And there is a synergy that's produced by that, because now, instead of just each friend maybe knowing that you're going through some tough times, now those friends can coordinate. Now they know each other. Now they can say, hey, Nick's feeling down. Let's throw him a surprise party. Hey, let's do this. Hey, Nick mentioned this to me. I don't have the resources to address this issue, but you do. Can you do this thing? Now, all of a sudden, you've turned one-off friendships into a tribe.
It sounds like the nature of that too is take a friend and use that to bring in new friends. So if you make friends with me, you'll actually make 3 friends, and then you have 3 more friends.
It's so powerful to just kind of leverage that. And not only that, it's also, what's really great is, because your friends are likely to be similar to you, at least on some aspects, this is card counting for friends. Because instead of me randomly talking to somebody on the street, or even randomly talking to somebody at work, am I going to get along with them? I don't know. But if I'm introduced through a friend, well, somebody I'm really close to, connected and bonded with this person, that dramatically, the deck is rich. That dramatically increases the chance that I'm going to get along with this person, that I'm going to have similarities with this person. So it's, the most powerful way, to make friends that way is to go through the friends you already have.
Yeah. And to the extent to which a lot of us gather at work too, that's something to think about in terms of strengthening people's connections with the people around them, turning more colleague relationships into friend relationships. What are some ways that people have been using technology to build the sense of tribe? And For companies, large tech companies like Google and others, what should we be thinking about in our products to help people feel less lonely, especially using the tools of the internet?
I mean, it can be tricky, like that can be something that's a little bit more difficult. I think we've all had, like the whole work from home debate. But,
Mhm.
I'm speculating, but one possibility here is the issue of video games,
Hmm.
where people feel if they're working on a team, they're connecting with one another, they're interacting with one another, they're accomplishing things together. That again, talking when we talked about reading people and the environment, other people, that's just a much richer, it's got a higher thread count, that when you're dealing with someone, accomplishing something, coordinating with someone, that takes it to a higher level than, merely just kind of talking about the weather.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think that you also shared a little bit about tools that emphasize intrinsic motivation over extrinsic motivation, like fame and fortune.
Yeah, basically that's what we're kind of seeing. It's kind of the social media debate where, we've seen this go back and forth, that social media can be positive, social media can be a negative, and social media can be a positive. The issue is, are we using it to leverage face-to-face get-togethers? If you're using social media, to organize a time to get together face-to-face, it's an unalloyed positive. If you're using it to replace face-to-face relationships, that's where it gets to be problematic. And the issue becoming that we only have so much time in the day. We only have 24 hours. And so if you're spending that much time on Instagram, would it be better to have dinner with a friend rather than to keep, staying on Instagram? We need to be careful that these kind of easier, quicker methods of connection that aren't as rich, that they don't cannibalize the limited amount of time we have for socializing in the day.
Yeah. It also sounds like there's an element of kind of making it about me versus making it about other people or us or the tribe, that kind of thing. Um, but that's really fascinating. So, your blog typically ends with a wrap up. So I guess as we wrap up here and begin to take some audience questions, how would you wrap up, I think, some of the most important lessons about friendships at work, loneliness, solitude, and tribe?
I mean, friendships make us happier than anything else. They make us healthy. It's really critical. A 2008 Journal of Socioeconomics study found that good friendships are the happiness equivalent of an extra $97,000 a year. It's really powerful. But the issue is that friendships are fragile. We don't have an institution backing them, pushing them. So we need to be a little bit more deliberate about it, especially as we age. Rituals can really help, having something consistent that we do on the calendar together. And to take those acquaintances and make them into deeper friendships, we need to think about time and vulnerability. We need to make time to see those people on a consistent basis. And we need to talk about some of the scary things so that people really know that we trust them, we believe in them, and that they understand what we're dealing with so that maybe they can help and maybe we can help them. Loneliness isn't so much about not being proximate with other people. Loneliness is how you feel about your relationships. And we can address that by deepening them. Again, those issues of time and vulnerability. So these are a number of critical things. And the final thing there is, like we talked about, by introducing our friends, we can turn one-off friendships into a community of sorts. That's the thing that started breaking down in the 19th century. We can address that. Even if we can't build huge institutions that draw millions of people together, we can do it on an individual basis by introducing our friends and creating our own little tribes.
Amazing. Well, I want to thank you so much for being a friend to all of us today. And now to, I think, reduce, I certainly don't feel lonely, but perhaps to reduce our solitude, this would be a wonderful opportunity for us to take a few questions from the audience. Is privacy a concern when being vulnerable with friends?
Absolutely. Like I talked about, you don't want to immediately offer up the most intimate and personal details. This is work by Daniel Hrushka. Basically, he talked about making it incremental. Talking about something that's a little bit scary, something that's a little bit more personal, and seeing how the person responds. If they are, blown away by, okay, maybe you don't want to go any further. If they don't reciprocate, okay, maybe they don't feel as close to you as you do to them. But to make it small and incremental, that's how we can deepen it while still being safe, still being cognizant that you don't want to do that. And also in the workplace, perceptions of leadership and power, you don't want to express vulnerabilities that might make you look like you are not competent at your job. But you can still express vulnerability in arenas that are parallel to your job, that don't have a relevance and won't make you look less competent. But by starting small and incrementally progressing, waiting for the person to reciprocate, that's a much safer way to move towards building a relationship without, issues of privacy or feeling uncomfortable.
Sounds like small bids where you feel a little bit uncomfortable with how the person, not in the economic competence sense, but small, slightly scary bids, incrementally scarier bids that hopefully get reciprocated. It sounds like that's how folk deepen relationships. And to your point for the privacy thing, there may be certain things you don't want to disclose, certainly not right away, but that may come down to the context of the friendship.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the concept of having a fixed number of weirdness points to spend? And if so, do you think that represents a real bottleneck for the scary rule for eccentrics?
Well, so the issue here is, basically is making that connection. It's like, yeah, some people we're a little more eccentric, some people are less eccentric. We can still find, things to bond over. The really critical part here is you see this from Dale Carnegie up through all the research, from dealing with strangers, close friends, even the toxic people, is that similarity is really powerful. Finding those similarities, because we aren't similar with people on everything. And we find different connections with different people. So first, if we can find those similarities, we can find a source of connection, something that we both have in common or something that we're both passionate about, we can develop those bonds. And as those bonds are built, then sure, then you can focus on the things that are a little bit awkward, a little bit weird, a little bit eccentric. We have those with all of our friends. You just don't necessarily want to lead with those because that's going to make people feel like they're different from you. At first, you want to lead with similarity, and that's what opens up the possibility of having those little differences, which, frankly, as the relationship grows, makes it more interesting, makes it more rich, is to have somebody who's not just a clone of you. So we lead with similarity, and then we get to eccentricity.
And it sounds like, depending on the context as well, I have friends in the cosplay community. I'm not personally in that community, but they really have deepened friendships because they share that similar interest, and they're then able to build that kind of tribe, right? Someone's really into a particular video game or a particular hobby. It sounds that's also a wonderful way to actually, find the share. It sounds Eric, like you're saying, ultimately you want to find your shared weirdness points.
I mean, that's the most powerful thing because it's like, again, when we talked about the issue of base rates and general, when you find if you have some very odd interest and you go to a community where everybody has that, you're going to feel so much more close to those people because it's just that much more of a rare commodity.
Awesome. I've noticed in my 30s, a lot of my friends are going through friend divorces after they stopped tolerating things that they allowed before. Is there a way to save these or prevent them in the future?
I mean, it's tricky because basically what you see is, was it after 7? I think the research shows that after 7 years, half of close friends are not close friends anymore. Robin Dunbar's research, he's the one who created the Dunbar number, which is the kind of the maximum number of people that you can be close to. And there are tiers for that. For closest friends, acquaintances, people you've ever met. So when, at times people will go through difficult situations and we do see those rotate. People who are close friends become acquaintances. People who are acquaintances sometimes get promoted to friend. The issue there is we really need to just be cognizant of it. We need to be cognizant of, how our relationship's doing. If you're connected to somebody and you're spending the time, again, time and vulnerability. If you're spending the time checking in with them, if you're opening up about what they're dealing with you, if you're comfortable enough talking about difficulties and differences you might have with your friend, then you can address those. In the love section of the book, I talk about one of the critical things with divorce, is that, marriage therapy doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because most people go too late. Usually people wait years after the first cracks in a marriage to actually start addressing it. I'd say that this is analogous to friendship. If you're checking in, if you feel comfortable talking about the status of the friendship, then you're going to be able to address problems as opposed to them simmering and festering.
Eric, it sounds like that also speaks to what you were sharing before about how to make other people more readable and actually doing that work to, hey, how's our friendship doing? And, that sort of.
No, I mean, to just be able to, that's where, again, the vulnerability is critical. Being able to do that. A lot of people don't want to do that. A lot of people are uncomfortable with that, or they feel like that's going to cause problems. It's like, if so, then incrementally you need to start, opening up about your feelings and discussing more topics, because otherwise it can reach that critical point and it might be too late to address.
How do we make more diverse friendships, especially if you find little in common?
I mean, so much of it is about the environments that we put ourselves in. It's very few of us walk up to strangers on the street, and try to become friends. And if we're looking to make friends, like I said, it's really powerful to have friends introduce you to friends. But another way is to become part of communities. Is like anything where people are regularly interacting and cooperating with one another is an opportunity to build deeper friendships. It actually is the reason why it's so difficult these days, is because those kind of institutions, aren't as prevalent as they were before. We kind of need to go out of our way, especially face to face. It's like one of the most famous books in the literature on this is called Bowling Alone, because if you think about bowling leagues, that used to be a big thing. People had bowling leagues, the Elk Lodge, like these kind of like groups and communities. They don't really exist as much anymore, or if they do, it's online, and there's just not as much of that rich interaction face to face. So what's really critical is, like I said, reaching out through friends, and then beyond that, trying to find other communities already established. And frankly, we can also start our own. If you have an interest of yours that a few other people, reach out, start to build community, start to build networks. That's actually more powerful because you become the center of it, the hub of the network. And that's actually a much richer place to be in terms of connections and relationships.
Sounds like a great way to get people to find a lot of people, including new and diverse friendships.
Yeah.
So are introvert, extrovert, modern world personality traits?
Introversion and extroversion that's probably like the most studied area of personality, and it's very fundamental. Those, I really doubt that is something new, because it goes a lot deeper than merely issues of people. How much time you like to spend with other people. It's actually a lot more. It's actually a lot more fundamental than that. If you look at the formal definition in terms of extroversion, extroversion has a lot more to do with, there's aspects of sensation seeking, there's aspects of dominance. With introversion, introverts have a lot more going on in their heads. Not that that's necessarily better or worse. It could be neuroticism, but it's a much more fundamental characteristic. So this isn't something new. It's just, do you drive a lot more from others? Do you recharge from being around others, or do you recharge by being by yourself? So these are something it's very likely something that's a lot more fundamental.
You mentioned a study where women use the same parts of the brain for thinking about self and friends. Was that specific to women? And is there other interesting research on gender differences in friendship?
That specific, that wasn't any sort of a real statement about gender in general. It was just that study, all the participants were women, and I didn't see a similar study that had been done, on men. But what's really critical, I think, is the fundamentals when it comes to relationships. Like I said, Carnegie for the sort of early acquaintance aspects, time and vulnerability. for everybody. Those are the real fundamentals that work for everybody. And I would encourage people to focus on those before we get into any kind of specifics that are, that are related to gender.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. Thank all of our Googler colleagues for these wonderful questions. And a special thank you to Eric for giving this wonderful talk, answering our questions, and being our special guest today. This was Eric Barker. My name is Nick Krasny, and thank you for coming back to Google.